Well, on Sunday evenings at about 8 o'clock, Stacy and I have a standing date with our grandchildren back in the United States. And we know that there's going to be a Zoom call with our two grandkids and their parents too, but they're kind of secondary to the whole thing, right? So we have two grandkids, one who's almost 3 and one who's almost 1. And usually when we do connect, because of the time difference, it's just after nap time, and so they're usually pretty happy, and it's a wonderful time where we can read them some stories, and the oldest one tells us a little bit about her day and her week, and it's great, and we love that time. Except for last week. Nap time didn't go so well last Sunday. And so we were in the middle of this conversation with our granddaughter, and she was happy. That's the emoji I'd use for her. And all of a sudden, one little thing that she wanted to do went wrong. She wanted to walk around the table one way, but her little brother was sitting in the way. She could have easily walked around the table the other way, but she didn't choose to do that. Instead, she yelled, "No!" And she burst into tears, and she got angry, and she refused to do anything but be angry. She was furious. She had a little bit of extra time in her bedroom at that moment, which is exactly the right thing to do, right? We teach our children, my daughter and mother are teaching their children how to handle their anger, right? You have to learn what to do with that emotion that comes flying up, maybe for the littlest of reasons, right? And so we learn how to handle, how to control, maybe to put down that anger in our lives. And sometimes we learn that lesson so well as adults that we begin to believe that it's wrong to ever feel angry, right? We avoid anger so much that it becomes kind of inappropriate. And in some ways that's true. God has given us some clear warnings about anger in Scripture, right? In Matthew 5, Jesus tells us that he takes anger seriously. This is Jesus' words. He says, "You have heard that it was said to people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.' But I tell you that anyone who's angry with a brother or sister will be subject to punishment." And he goes on later in that chapter to encourage us, instead of anger, to live with gentleness and grace. He says, "You've heard that it was said, 'Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth.' But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Control that anger," right? He says. If you want a crystal clear direction, James chapter 1 simply says, "Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." Control that anger, right? Jesus modeled for us, didn't he, a life of gentleness. He himself said I am gentle and humble. Right? Think about the moment Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. Right? His enemies come with soldiers armed with swords and clubs, and he knows that he's innocent. He knows that this is wrong, and he gently allows them to take him. That in the moment of all that brokenness, he's the one that brings healing. Peter cuts off a servant's ear and he says, "Stop it, stop." And he heals the servant and allows himself to be taken away. Gentle and humble. And we're called to imitate Jesus, right? But honestly, we do get angry. I get angry. And I'm certain that you have moments when you get angry. There's moments when I'm not that much different from my 3-year-old granddaughter. And I just shout, "No, no!" sometimes when life is hard, right? When things go terribly wrong, we even get angry at God. What do we do with that when we've taught not to be angry, right? We've been taught, especially, don't be angry with God because He's God. And so when we get angry, and we get angry at God, often we just feel worse about ourselves because we begin to feel guilty about feeling angry, right? And so we just feel worse. Or sometimes we feel worse about God. And in our anger, we say, God, if you really cared, why didn't you do something? God, if you really love me, if you really are good, and if you're really powerful, why did you let this happen? Either way, if that's what we do with our anger, we're left dissatisfied. We're left all mixed up inside. And so our one-word prayer for today, for this week, is no. Right? What do we do with that no, that anger? Well, Jesus shows us a healthier way to handle, to process, and to experience the anger that we have. Because Jesus did get angry, right? He wasn't always gentle and meek and mild. Remember the story of Palm Sunday? Palm Sunday, when Jesus rides into Jerusalem on the donkey, and the people celebrate him as king, and it's this kind of the moment of coronation for him, of victory. If you read the story, he rides his donkey into Jerusalem, and he goes to the temple, and that's when he walks into the temple courtyard, and he sees all the business people selling sheep and goats in the courtyard meant for prayer. Right? It's the Passover, so people need to buy sheep. They need to buy goats for the sacrifice. And so this whole temple courtyard becomes a place of business instead of a place of prayer. And Jesus walks in and says, this is wrong. And he turned over their tables, spilling all their money. And he braids a whip and he chases out all the animals and all the merchants. He was angry. And so maybe that story should make us rethink our understanding, our perspective, and when we feel anger. Let's talk about that this morning. Let's start by understanding that anger in itself is neither right nor wrong. It just is. Right? Here's the definition. Anger is an emotion of displeasure and antagonism aroused by a wrong. Okay, it's an emotion. I was good friends with a Christian psychologist back in the States, and he taught me that and reminded me of that often. He said, emotions, no emotion is right or wrong. It just is. We don't control them. They come up, right? We feel these emotions. They're neither right nor wrong. It's what we do with those feelings that leads us down a good path or a bad path. So what are we going to do when we feel anger? Well, that human anger that James said, in human anger, that's the kind of anger that leads us towards sin. And there's three characteristics. If you're getting angry and if you want to wonder if this is a sinful kind of anger, checklist of three things. Okay? This human anger is always a passionate againstness. I think I'm making up that word, but it works, okay? It's a passionate againstness. This kind of anger, human anger, always is focused on punishing our enemy, of avenging whatever wrong has been done to us, of inflicting more hurt and more damage, rather than focus on finding healing for ourselves. Right, so if you've been hurt, right, this sinful anger will encourage you to inflict pain on the one who hurt you. Right? Respond back. Eye for eye, tooth for a tooth, we just read. Okay? It always keeps us focused on what we are against instead of what we're for. And this passionate againstness that we feel is always directed towards others, always directed towards somebody else, even if we're to blame, even if we have a part to play. So you get kicked off the football team for breaking the rules. Man, it's that mean coach who did it to me. You fail your exam because you didn't study. Boy, that professor is terrible, isn't he? It's his fault. Your marriage is struggling. It's always your spouse's fault. You're short on money. Boy, those kids sure eat a lot, don't they? There's always somebody else to blame. Right? That sinful human anger always targets somebody else. And once that anger has a target, it is destructive. It breaks things. It breaks bones and breaks furniture. It breaks trust and breaks promises and breaks relationships apart. It breaks friendships and marriages. Right? When this human anger has control of us, nothing around us is safe. Even the people we love. And my guess is some of you right now are thinking, I've experienced that. I know what that kind of anger looks like. I know what that kind of anger feels like. Because the damage that kind of sinful human anger can do is huge. We see it again and again in stories in Scripture. Way back at the beginning of this book, Genesis chapter 4, Adam and Eve's two sons, Cain and Abel, right? One of them brings a good offering to God, Abel does. Cain brings an offering of seconds. Cain is so angry at his brother's goodness that he kills him. The book of 1 Samuel, Saul is the king of Israel, right? And he sees David, his servant, playing music for him. David is his friend, and he knows that David's goodness is going to lead him to be king. So because of David's goodness, he hurls his spear at him and tries to kill him and breaks that relationship. Right? What about at Jesus' birth? Herod is king. And he gets angry at the wise men because they don't come back to him like they say. And in his anger, what does he do? He kills all the baby boys around Bethlehem. Oof. Damaging. It's easy, and we're tempted often to let our anger we often lose control in, don't we? When we get this emotion of anger, it's so easy to let that emotion lead us towards this kind of sinful action. And when we feel that emotion, when we feel that anger come, yes, it's okay to shout no, to be angry, but then stop and listen. Right? We're talking about, in this series, prayer as a conversation with God, a relationship with Him. So dare to shout your no, to share your anger. Say that one word prayer. God, no! And then listen. Stop before you do anything and listen. Because God might lead you down a different path. Always let God shape what your action is going to be, what your response is going to be to this emotion that you feel. And maybe even now, I assume most of you right now are not feeling overwhelming anger. I hope you're not, okay? So maybe now is a good time, before you feel that emotion of anger, to have a conversation with God and to ask Him, what am I too angry about? What is it in my life that I let anger take control of? What do I need to let go of? Maybe there's an unforgiven hurt that you're holding on to, and every time it comes to mind, you let yourself get angry, and you're angry at that person who hurt you. And you're holding on to this bitterness inside of you, and you're just saying, oh, I want to hurt. And God's saying, maybe it's about time to process that hurt, to offer some forgiveness, to let go of some bitterness, because you're too angry about this now. Maybe there's a disappointment that you have with God, where you feel like He let you down. And every time you think of Him, and every time you go to Him, you feel this anger, and it's blocking your relationship with Him. And maybe God's going to say, let's process that together. You're too angry now. What are some things in your life that you're too angry about? And so let your honest, angry no come out, and let it lead you to a healing conversation with God. And you let go of some of this human anger that leads you towards sin. If we all stop in those moments of anger and listen to God, I think we might be surprised to find out that there is a good place for anger in our lives. After all, that time in the temple where Jesus flipped over the tables and chased out the animals and the merchants, that wasn't the only time that He was angry. If you've read the Gospels, you see those other times too, like when the disciples kept the little children away from Him, right? He was teaching, and the disciples said to the little ones, hey, stay away. He's busy doing important work. It says that Jesus got angry. He got angry with them and said, let the little children come. The kingdom belongs to them. Right? Read back in the Old Testament. Remember when Israel made the golden calf out in the desert? And the people worshiped the golden calf instead of God. If you read that story, you read that God the Father was angry. He was seriously angry with His people. So if Jesus and God the Father are angry, there's got to be a good kind of anger. And there is a good anger that we should have in our lives. It's a godly anger. And godly anger isn't just aroused by any wrong. Let me change that word. Godly anger is aroused by injustice. By injustice in this world. God says to us, there are times when we should be angry. There are times when we must be angry. And this good and godly anger has just the opposite characteristics as the sinful anger that we just looked at. Right? This godly anger is a passionate forness, another made-up word that works. It's a passionate forness. This anger is passionate for the things of God. It's passionate for goodness, for justice, for wholeness, in the face of brokenness and sin and evil that offends God. Right? So it responds to defend what it is for, not just to destroy what it is against. Right? So the stories when Jesus was angry, right? He is so passionately for the worship of God, so passionately for prayer in the courtyard that's designated for prayer and worship, that he can't stand to see the temple turned into something that is not supposed to be, a place of business. And so he's for worship and prayer, and he defends it. Jesus is so passionately for the equality of all people in his kingdom that when the little children are cast aside, he's angry, and his anger says, I'm for you, and I want you here. I want equality and justice and love for all in my family. Passionate forness. And as a result, the energy of that anger is spent for the good of others. It works for their good. It cares about others enough to protect them and defend them when they maybe can't do it for themselves. It cares enough about God to be actively bringing His goodness and His justice and His love into the injustice of this world, into the brokenness around us that should anger us. So instead of destroying things, instead of being destructive, godly anger leads us to be productive for His kingdom purposes. Right? It's what motivates us to work for justice when we can't stand the injustice that we see. It's what motivates us to work towards restoration for the broken relationships that we can't stand to have be broken. It's what motivates us to work for love and unity when we see the hatred of racism and abuse. It's what motivates us to stand for what's right in the face of what's wrong. Right? Good anger, godly anger, is what motivates us to change this world for God's purposes and for His kingdom. It's what moved the Old Testament prophets to confront the godless kings and queens like Elijah did, we talked about last week, right? It's what made John the Baptist condemn all the self-serving religious leaders. It's what led Paul to stand up for the equality of the Gentiles when the Jewish church wasn't so sure. And it's what led Jesus to the cross, to defeat the sin and the death and the brokenness that made Him so angry. It's what led Him to set us free. So know this, know that God invites us, wants us to join Him in being angry at the right times for the right reasons, and to let that anger move us to godly action for His kingdom, to work for justice and goodness and love all around us, to work towards bringing His healing kingdom into our broken relationships and our broken families and our broken friendships and our broken workplaces and our broken classrooms and our broken communities. But the challenge for us often is we don't get angry enough for the right reasons. Right? Oh, we can get angry when our favorite sports team loses, especially if it's the referee's fault. Then we have somebody to really get angry at, right? And we can be angry when a slow driver is in the left lane and keeping us from getting to work on time. And we can be angry when our phone battery dies because it didn't charge overnight like it was supposed to. And we can be angry when on a Saturday morning the birds just sing way too loudly, way too early. But we don't seem to get angry enough about lives being destroyed by war in Ukraine, in Gaza, in Sudan, in Myanmar. We often don't get angry enough. Last week we heard from Amar Dragoste. We don't get angry enough about women being trafficked and abused in Madrid, right here in our own neighborhoods. We don't get angry enough when we see coworkers having to deal with sexism and racism. We don't get angry enough when classmates are bullied and we don't want to get involved. We don't get angry enough at whatever injustice it is that you see. We should be angry about these things. And that holy anger within us should move us to get involved, to work towards change. So earlier we asked the question, what is it that we're too angry about? The second question for this morning that we should ask is, what should we be more angry about? That's a question we should ask God. God, what is it that you want me to be more angry about? That you want me to be angry enough to act, to do something? And then asking that question, then listen. Let him tell you where he wants you to take a stand for what's just and right and loving and good and kind. Let him tell you, let him point you, that's the wrong in this world that I want to make right through you. It might be something big, it might be something small, but he wants to use you. So our one-word prayer is no. Think about a 3-year-old shouting no and throwing herself on the ground. Right? Take that word with you into this week. Pay attention to when these feelings of anger come up. And be honest with God. He said he can handle whatever honesty we have, right? Whatever emotion we feel, you can go to God and say, no, I'm angry, God. Shout those feelings of anger to him when you have to. And then stop and listen. Pay attention. Remember, prayer is conversation, not just talking, but listening as well. And if you listen, God might just move you this week to take a stand for what's good, for what's right, in the face of whatever it is, whatever that evil, whatever that sin is that made you angry, whatever that wrong that you see. And interestingly enough, you might just find that instead of feeling like you're shouting no at God, you might just find yourself shouting no with God. Right alongside of him. Saying, no, that's not the way it's supposed to be. No, that's not what I want. When you're shouting no with God, that's when he can use you. That's when he will use you to bring his kingdom, to bring the rightness in the midst of the wrong, to bring justice in the face of injustice, to bring healing where there's hurt. And then his kingdom will come. And that's when his will be done through you. Let's pray for that together. Would you join me?